Hey everybody, and welcome back. Certainly glad you could join me today. In today's video we are going to start adding some code, and the first thing we're going to do is define our classes. Before I get started, a huge thank you to all of my patrons and members. Your names will be running across the bottom of the screen as we speak. If you are interested in supporting the channel, feel free to hit that subscribe button. Give me a thumbs up, let me know what you think in the comments below. There is a link to my Patreon in the description below, or you could just become a channel member by hitting the join button next to the subscribe button. So in order to keep our code organized, we are going to create a new folder within our script, and we're just going to call this one initialization, like that. And then we can put all of our class definitions, all of our screens and so on inside this folder, and then we always know where to go for those. So we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call this one classes.rpy, and there's our new code there. So in our previous episode we looked at the properties that we wanted our classes to initially have. And this isn't a exhaustive list, and we can always go back and change it a bit later on. But for now, everything we need is laid out here. And the first thing that I'm going to create is our location class. So we're going to go into our classes, and the first thing we need to do is create an init Python block like that, and then hit return. And just give us a bit of space there so that if we need to insert any code above it, we can do that later on without getting too lost. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a class, and we're going to call this class place with a capital P, and it's going to inherit from object like that. Now people have questions before why we do things in the specific way that I've been doing them, and I will do my best to explain as we go along. So when we create an instance of a class, then we need to run an initialization script or method to define those object properties. So what we do is we say def underscore underscore init underscore underscore, and then we add our properties there. And the first thing we do is we pop self in there, and then we're going to add some properties. Now, the def init method is just a method, so everything that we put within the brackets is just an argument. You can call these whatever they are. These do not define the names of the class properties. So I could just put A, B, C, D, E, F, G inside there. However, it would be difficult for us to assign those to the correct values. So what we generally do is we put the names of the class properties inside these brackets as well, so that we always know which property corresponds to which argument. So if, for example, if I were to put tree here and then trees there, and then we were to say, put a colon at the end of there. Now if we were to say self.tree, which is us now creating the place.tree value, we could say like that, or we could say tree, or if we had different variables in the arguments, we accidentally type trees there, then what it's going to actually do is, even though we've named that we've got tree and trees, the actual trees argument is the one that's being given to the value of the tree property. So this is why we do this. We do this so that we don't get confused and accidentally assign the wrong property to the wrong value in the arguments like that. So what we're going to do is, first thing we're going to do is we're going to give our name there like that. We're going to capitalize all of our properties in there. And now we're going to say cf underscore, no we're not, we're going to do cf name like that. That's our code friendly name. And then we're going to say is active or is locked, but we can just say is active, it's fine, like so. So now when we declare self.name, so that's us creating the name property, then we say name like that, And then we know that the argument that's passed in here is going to correspond to the correct value there. And now we do the same thing for here. So we say cf name like that equals cf name like that. And the reason that this works is because when we create a class, we also create what we call a namespace. So think of this as a bubble, where anything that we create inside this bubble is going to only affect everything else inside the bubble and nothing outside of the bubble. So we've created the object namespace here, and then we've created another namespace inside this definition. So the values that we put in here don't correspond to any variables outside of this bubble that may have the same name. So if we were to create a variable called name in the global game, this would not be that variable. This is only affecting the namespace of this bubble. I hope that's clear. If it's not, let me know in the comments below and I'll do my best to reword it in a more simple way. So self.isActive equals is active, and we check that those names are all identical. Name, cf name, is active, boom. So now when we create this class, we pass in 3 arguments, name, cf name, and is active, and they will be assigned to the correct properties within that class. Now, what we can also do is we can reference a file name of a background image so that we're always getting the correct background image. And what we can do is we can type in @property. So we're creating a new property that is going to be decided based on whatever value is put in the code friendly name, rather than having to input the value every single time. Because if we were to change the code friendly name for any reason, or if we were to change the file path, we only have to change that information once, rather than having to do it for every single instance of our object. So property, then we're going to say definition, and we're going to call this one, I think we're just going to call this one bg_image, like that. And we're just going to give it the self so that we know it's referencing the instance and nothing else. And that's what we need for that. Now we're going to say, we're just going to create a random variable. We'll just call it file path. Spelled path correctly. Equals. And now we're going to say we need to input our file path. So for the purposes of this demonstration, we're just going to give it, it's already going to reference in the images folder. And we're going to call this one places. We're going to create a folder called places, and then we're just going to say backgrounds, like so, and then we're going to do that. Now we're going to add our code friendly name, so we'll say self.cf name, and then we're going to add a file extension. So we're going to make all of these .jpeg so that we don't get confused. So all of our background images for our locations are going to need to be JPEGs. And then when we call for the background image to be put on the screen, it will go to images, places, backgrounds, whatever the location's code friendly name is, .jpeg. And that's all we have to do for that. We just simply hit return file path like that. And then that will push that out. So whenever we reference the background image property without needing to put brackets on the end of it, we will get this in return. So there we go. Now that we've created our class, what we can do is we can go back into the main body of the init Python block, and we can actually create a list of properties with default values. Now, I don't necessarily always do this, but I'm going to demonstrate how we do it so that if you want to do it that way, then you can obviously crack on. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a list of locations like that, and we're going to create it as a list. And then we're going to say a maximum or a current number of locations. We're going to say there's going to be 20. Now what we need to do is we actually need to instantiate our class. So we're going to say place like this. There we go. So we're now going to create a list of 20 places. Now for each one, we need to add 3 arguments. So we're going to call this one no name. And then we're going to no name in here. And then we're going to put is active equals false, like so. So regardless of what happens, we've got a list of 20 locations. None of them are active and they've all got no name and no name as their properties. And that is how you do that. Now, I'm not going to do it that way simply because I want to have all of my locations instantiated with the correct values from the get-go. So we're actually going to delete that one. And we're just going to create a list. And now what we're going to do is we're going to append to that list with a few examples. So we're going to say locations.append. And then we need to put in there a place. And we're going to give that place our 3 variables, our 3 values. And I'm going to start off with all of them being locked. And that's all we need to do. So we can actually copy that and we can just create 5 locations like that, and then we just have to give them names. Now this is where your planning is going to come into play. I assume that, and I would highly recommend that you have an idea of your locations and your general storyline before you get started with this tutorial series. You can sort of fudge it and start creating stuff and write and change as you go along, but I'd highly recommend that you plan your story and you have an idea of where it's going to take place and its locations before you get started, because you don't want to have to keep rewriting code and changing properties as you go along, because that significantly slows you down and it does create more opportunities for you to make mistakes. One of the hardest lessons that I learned when I was writing one of my earlier games is not really having a particularly clear plan. When I started, I had an idea of the storyline and I had an idea of how it's going to work, but as I got better at using Python and Ren'Py, I learned new ways of doing things, and it ended up being a bit of a mess because I just was trying to change parts of the core code, trying to change parts of the core storyline as well after I'd started. And I highly recommend you don't do that because it can be a real pain when you try and go back and change things. So it's good to keep things organized and in place when you first start out. So for this, I'm going to create 5 new locations and I'm going to call one of them the bank. And we're just going to go with bank there. Now, if I were to be creating let's say a house that had more than 1 bedroom, I could, for example, go with bank 01 or something like that. And then that would allow me to differentiate between the locations. But because we're doing bank, we don't need to. Then we're going to go with gas station, like so. For those of you in the UK with me, that'll be petrol station or motorway services. And what we can do here is just go gas_station, like that. Now we're going to go with hotel, and you could put anything you wanted in here. You could put like Hotel Paradiso, and then you could just put hotel in a code friendly name if you didn't want to have to keep typing Paradiso every time you created a new game object or a new location that might be a hotel. A lot of cities have multiple hotels. So again, this is really up to you what you put into these strings. It's just bear in mind that all of your file names that correspond with those locations needs to be whatever you put in the second set of speech marks, and whatever the player is going to see is going to be whatever you put in here. So just keep that in mind when you're creating these values, otherwise things could get a little bit bonkers. So the next thing we're going to create is my home. And in this one, we're just going to put home like so. And then in the last one, we're going to put my garden. And you can have any location. So for example, on the large map, you can just display certain locations. You could add another property to this class that says maybe sub-location or something like that. That would allow you to denote whether or not these locations are displayed on the large map or if they're in inner locations. So for example, you wouldn't be able to get to my garden until you're actually in the my home location. For simplicity at the moment, we're just going to leave it as it is. So we've got our 5 locations there, and that's all we need for that. And I'm just going to get rid of those extra spaces. Cool, so that's our locations defined. The next thing we want to do is add some objects to those locations. But in order for us to do that, we're going to have to do some messing around. So I'm actually going to do the characters next. So we're going to create a new class, and this one's going to be people, like so. And it's going to be an object as well. And we're going to add our bracket colon there. And then we're going to go through the init again. And we're going to add some properties. Now, remembering what I said, this is just arguments that we put in here. These do not correspond to the actual variables or the properties of the class. So we can actually name these whatever we want. And to prove that, I'm going to do that in here. So we're going to go with first name, like that. But because we don't necessarily want to mess around typing that all the time, the class property isn't going to be called that. Then we're going to call this one surname, like so. Then we're going to go back to our notes and see what other properties we want our characters to have. Name, location, and is active. So we want to call this one location, like so. And then is active in here, like that, and then close it off with a colon so that we know that whatever follows is going to be within that namespace. So we want to create self dot. Now this is where we create our class property name. So we can just call this one fname, and then all we have to do say equals first name, like that, and that will work, and the class property will be fname, not first name. So that's useful stuff to know. Self dot surname, so we'll just put in sname equals surname. And I know I'm laboring the point, but it is very important that we grasp this concept so that when we create classes, we know where we're going wrong if something goes wrong. And it allows you that little bit of freedom to create these things as you wish. So we're going to say self dot location equals location, and then self dot is active equals is active, like that. Cool. Now what we can do is we can say, we can create a property decorator, and we can say define. And we're just going to pull this one out, and we're just going to say full name. That, pop self in there, and now we've created a new namespace for this define. And all we're going to say is output equals self.fname, making sure that we get everything correct, everything identical, case sensitive, spelling, and so on, plus input a space in between, and then self.sname, like that, and then we're going to return output like that. Now when we call for their full name, we will get the first name space surname, and that's useful in some instances. It doesn't really make that much of a difference, but it's just another way of doing things. And another thing that we can do is to make life easier, we can actually create a lock and unlock methods for the people. And we could have done this for the places as well. It doesn't really make any difference which class we do it to. We can do it to all of them if required. So what we're going to do is we're going to define a new method, and we're just going to unlock, and we're going to put self in there, And this just saves us having to type a lot of formula in the actual code. We can just say self dot is active equals true. And then we can go into another class. We can say another method, sorry, and we can say define lock self new namespace. We can say self dot is active equals false, like so. Now, the reason we're doing this inside the class definition and we're not just saying character1 dot is active equals true or equals false in the game code is because it just takes a bit longer to type. So we might as well do it here, and then we can just put characters1 dot unlock, and then it'll do that for us. So it's really that simple. So we can actually copy this code here, and we can come up to here underneath our BG image property, and we can just pop those straight inside there. Because the variable or the property is the same, is active, we can actually just put exactly the same code in there and it will work fine. Now, tip here, press Ctrl S, save everything, make sure that the code is there, because you don't want to have to faff around and try and re-find all of this code or retype it all afterwards because you've closed it down or whatever. So there's that. Just make sure you save regularly in case of any reasons. I'm actually one of those people, I tend to forget to save until I'm actually ready to run the code. I would highly recommend doing it every few minutes, every time you type something new, so that you don't forget to do it. Okay, so that's our people class set up and ready to go. So now we can create a list of that. So we're going to call this characters. I'm going to spell characters correctly. And we're just going to make that a standard list. I accidentally tapped the 4 button there. Don't put 4 in there. Cool. So now we're going to say characters dot append, and we're going to put a people in there. And inside there, we're going to give it some values. So we're going to call this one Davey, and then his surname is going to be Jones. And then we're going to put him in the bank, like so. Now, you could theoretically use the code-friendly name in here as well. It genuinely doesn't matter. You could even put the integer value of the location. So let's do that instead and just see what happens. We can put, so location 0 is the bank, so we're going to just put 0 in there. And then we're going to say is active. We're going to say it's true so that we know that Davy Jones is going to be in the bank when we get there. Now, if we wanted to, we could just create a few more characters and give them new values. So we're going to call this one Frank, and we're going to call this one Smith. I'm going to call this one Jenny, and we're going to give her a surname. Oh, interesting. Williams. And then we're going to create a Zoe, and we're going to just put in there another nickname. So we can give these different locations. I'm going to put Frank Smith. He's going to be in Hotel Paradiso. I'm going to let Jenny stay in the bank with Davey, and Zoe Moore, we're going to put her in the gas station like that. They're all active, so that's good. So now we have 4 characters in our game that have all got names and have all got property true set and their location. So that's that. Now, we are going to have to create some default variables at this point, so that we can add another method to this class. So in our initialization folder, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new file, and we're just going to call this defaults underscore defines.rpy. And this is where we're going to put all of our defaults and defines so that we can make sure that the initial variables are all correct. So we're going to create a default, and it's going to be our location. And we are going to initially start off in. Now we can make this a number, or we can make it a word. And just for simplicity, I'm going to make it a word. So we are going to say bank there, like that. So now we can save again because we've created new stuff. Come back into our classes like so. And now we can say with certainty that we have a location. And what we need to do is we need to create an avatar property for our characters. So we're going to say property, giving it that property decorator. And then we're going to say avatar self like that. And remembering that we're inside the avatar definition namespace now, so we need to reference a global variable. So we've got to type in the word global, spelling it correctly, and we need to type location. So now we're accessing the game's location variable and not a variable that we would create inside this namespace. So global location. So now we need to output a value from this. So we need to put output equals. Now we need to decide whether we're going to put the location at the start of the name or the character's name. I would recommend putting the character's name at the start of the file names so that you don't get lost. If you're trying to find a specific person, then you can find them much easier. So we're going to call this one images, and we're going to call this one avatars. Our name. So now we need to decide how we're going to name our files because we haven't got a code friendly name currently in our class. That is something that we should have done. So we're going to call this now a CF name. And then we're going to say self.cf name equals cf underscore name like that. And obviously now we need to add that into here. So we're going to create a new string inside there. And we're just going to go Davy underscore Jones. And we're just going to do the same thing essentially for all of the characters like this. And this is why we need to make sure we plan our code so that we don't have to do this too much, because I know that I'm just copy pasting at the moment, but that would have been a great opportunity for me to add a typo into my code or anything like that, which would have caused the code to stop running. And sometimes it's difficult to find our faults when we have little typos in there. So we've got to remember to keep on top of that sort of thing. So there we go. We've got our code friendly names now. So now we can say self.cf name plus. Now, because we want these to have transparency, we're going to have to make sure that these are all PNGs. So we've got our location output. So we've got our name, sorry. Then we've got to put in our locations. So plus like that. Okay, so this again is not ideal because we need to actually put in a code friendly version of our location inside this folder. We're going to create a method which returns the integer value of our location, and we're going to create another value, another method that returns the code friendly name of the location that we are in. So what we're going to do at the bottom of our code block here, going to add, and we're going to just define a new method, and what we're going to call this one is code underscore, no, we'll just do it like this, I before E, code friendly location like that. And then we're actually going to not input a value in there like that because there's no requirement to do so. We could, in fact, yeah, let's do it. Let's do it like this. We're going to put in our low. No, we're not. No, change your mind. So we're just going to declare it as a global variable there like that. And we're going to say location. And then we also need to reference the global list locations like so. No, so for Q in locations, if location equals Q dot name return u dot code friendly name, like that. I'm going to rename this method name like that because we obviously want to create another definition, and then at the end of this we're just going to say return nothing, and that's just so that it always returns something. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing again. We're in fact just going to copy and paste this like so, and we're going to add a space between them, and then we're just going to create a number like that. And now we're just going to say if location equals location name, and all we're going to do is return, and we're actually going to add some extra code here, thinking about it. Q, comma, I in enumerate brackets locations, like that. And then all we're doing is we're just returning the integer value of I. In this one, we're just going to return -1 if it's wrong, because -1 is outside of the list bounds, which means that it will throw up an exception if we try to reference something that doesn't exist. So now that we've created those methods, we now have a way of getting that information into our methods without adding a load of extra code to the method. It just makes things a little bit simpler. So we're going to do this, and we're just going to say code friendly. We can just copy and paste this bit actually like so. Pop that in there like that. And now what it'll do is it'll add the code friendly location name to the file name. And one last thing that we need to do that I didn't spot like that is we need to actually add an underscore in there. And that just helps us with our file names. Okay, now that we've got to this stage, it's a good idea to just quickly run through and check if we've made any mistakes. And I can see one deliberate mistake already. I say deliberate mistake, it's just me being a little bit happy with the shift key, in that append does not have a capital A. So we're going to remove all of those capital A's from there. And we'll do the same thing with this list here. Again, good to double check and make sure that everything is where it's supposed to be. Another issue that I've just spotted is that we need to make sure that this list is defined outside of the scope of the class. So we need to hold down Shift, press Tab, and now that's outside the scope of that. And then we just make sure, yeah, look, we've done it correctly here, but we didn't press the backspace key when we created this list here. So now that we've checked, I'm just running through the code again to make sure there's no more problems. Right, that all seems to be fine. So we should be able to run the game's code, and we won't see any of this stuff taking action yet because we haven't actually referenced any of this information presently. But we can still run the code and check that it's actually error-free. So we can do that by dragging this across into the correct thing. We're going to launch our project. And there you go. So we're reasonably confident if I hit there, we get the default Eileen, yada, 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 runs fine. So that we know we haven't at least made any major errors in here that will cause the game to fall over. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that our code is 100% correct. It just means that there's no syntax errors currently. There's no infinite loops. There's no list definitions in the wrong place. And everything is spelled correctly. So we won't know whether all of this code is actually going to work until we actually start using these classes properly. But that's part created. So I'm actually going to call it an end to this episode here, guys. This has gone on for quite a long time. So thank you ever so much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you in the next episode. Take care of yourselves, guys. Bye-bye.